Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Today, I have Lee Baucom with me. Lee, hi, welcome. Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lee, I told you you're a rare gem. So I joke, there are not a lot of men that I can find to do these episodes with me, but you are a marriage coach and an author and a podcaster and a speaker. Like you do all the things. So we have so much to get into today. So I am not going to do your introduction justice because you do so many amazing things. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us a little about who you are, where you are, what you do, and how you got into all of this.
Yeah, so I started out as a therapist, but I moved to coaching because I realized that really is what I was doing anyway. And my wife will tell you the story that I was in the middle of finishing up my dissertation for my PhD when I said, "Oh, honey, this is what I do," and I turned to an article on coaching, and she said, "What are you going to do after all this training you've done?" So I immediately finished my dissertation and started training as a coach, and that was 1996, and have been doing coaching and working with couples since then. So along the way, part of my diversion was realizing that a lot of the stuff I'd been taught in therapy training wasn't particularly effective with couples. And so I started looking for things that worked, and different ways of approaching that. That led me to create the Save the Marriage system, which is what started kind of all of my stuff on the internet. That was in 1999. So it's been a while
Wow.
now.
Yep.
And since then, I've written a number of books, started a podcast, but it all started in the fact that I realized as a child the destruction that happened with divorces in my extended family. My parents are happily married still. My grandparents were happily married, but not so much with my aunts and my uncles. So I have cousins that I don't know where they are from that.
Mm.
And I think that kind of set the stage for me to say, you know what, marriage is kind of a bigger deal than people give it credit. Usually they figure out how important it was when they're in trouble. And so my goal was to help people figure out how to find a relationship that really works for them. And that's just been my career.
I love that. And then you've written several books. So, what is the main focus of your, I guess what's your passion specifically in working with couples? You do a lot of, your coaching is remote, like people can work with you from wherever, but what are the typical kinds of things that couples present with when they come and find you?
Well, so the interesting thing about that, yeah, you're right. And you're going to recognize the same thing. I started working remotely as soon as I started coaching. So, when the COVID thing hit and all the therapists were going, "Oh my, I've got to go remote." I'm like, I've been doing that for
Yep.
years. So nothing new there. And the reason is because that meant that people from wherever could access me and information. And what I realized was people come because they name a symptom and they think that's the problem. And so we see lots of symptoms as the problem. And then you spend a lot of time saying, well, that's the symptom. The real issue here is how disconnected you've gotten in the relationship. And, um, you know, as far as I can tell, nobody uh, goes through a wedding and their intention is to not make it. They always have the intention, and what gets in the way generally is life. And so I talk about the pause button marriage. When you hit the pause button, and I'm not saying that even people say, "Oh, I think I'm going to pause this," but they more set it up as soon as we get through this stage of life, which is continually moving. It's the false horizon after the false horizon. Once we get to this, so once we get the kids to school, once we get the kids out of school, once we get the kid, and then once the grandkids get to school, and on it goes. Or once I get this done in my career, or this done in my hobbies, or whatever, we'll get back to us. And along the way, they become so disconnected that when they finally do go, "Oh, back to you and me," they don't know who the you and me are anymore, because just to recap to here, what they really needed to be doing was getting to we. We are a team. We're in this together. And so then that changes how you would carry out the kids, the career, everything else is we're in this together. Um, so my basic theory is that you always would start as you, me, right? When people find each other, it's you, me. And at some point, they make it to you and me and think that
Mhm.
that's going to carry them through. And you and me if they don't make that switch to we're a unit now, we're a team, quickly becomes you versus me. And that's the effect of hitting the pause button. It's when you put two people together, they're either going to join together or become oppositional. And many times they don't know what the goal is. And so they end up in opposition. So that's
Yeah.
in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love it. I love the idea that kind of looking at it as a pause button, because I absolutely agree. So many of our couples that we work with and just people we know in our lives, like life is full, it never stops. We don't ever have time. We have to make time to do the things that are valuable to us. And I think that's a kind of a pitfall, no matter what part of your life you're really wanting to nurture and you just don't get around to it. But why you and I do what we do is because we see the value of the marriage as the foundation of pretty much anything in your life. And if your marriage isn't strong and isn't in a good place, then everything else suffers. And when you have kids, I mean, kids take every little drop of attention and energy that you have because they need you to survive. Like we have to give them that, but we also chose these partners, these spouses, that we chose them because we wanted to live with them and we wanted to nurture our marriage with them. And I think that so much of the time, absolutely to your point, it's so hard for couples to see that they can do both. And so it almost seems like I've had some couples say, well, my kid needs me, my spouse doesn't. I'm like, yeah, actually he or she does. Like
Yeah.
that is very important. It just looks different. And yeah, you can't give your spouse the exact amount of time, but it's not about it's not the quality quantity, it's the quality when it comes to your marriage. And so I think what you and I see is that we can look at it from the outside and say, okay, this can be done. Let's just take a step back and look at some creative ways to do this. But let's also figure out why you're having a hard time balancing your marriage and taking care of yourself and taking care of your kids and all of that. So what, like, as you try to explain this kind of idea to couples, do you find that they are self-aware? Like if you point out this idea of the pause button marriage, do they recognize that they're doing it?
Yeah, most of the time when I say that, they can look back and say, yeah, and then they go in two directions, one of two directions. One is to go, yes, but, which is always fun to chase down.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but the kids needed me. Yes, but the career needed me. Yes, but whatever. Or they go, yes, oh my, what do we do now? The yes, but can often come back to that same point, but that is a response that many people say is, I had no choice. And, so Jack Canfield's one of my favorite people, and he talks about the fact that there's that word responsibility, and we have the ability to respond. You put that word together, responsibility. And
Mm.
so the question is, are we going to take responsibility to change how that goes, or are we going to keep saying, I can't help it, there's nothing I can do here? And this is kind of where, so when I talk about working on your marriage, I always talk about the 3 C's of that, of connecting with your spouse. We've talked about how important that is just briefly. Changing yourself, and I want to come back to that in just a minute, and then creating a new path. Creating the new path is getting to that place where you're a team, you're a we, you're the unit. And so the primary unit of a family is the couple. The kids are part of that unit, but the primary unit is that couple, and where that couple goes is where the family goes. And so how do you build the path to get to that mindset? And I
Mhm.
really do think that there are many times people will say, well, my spouse is not interested. I'm like, can you change your mindset? Can you start with where your mindset is not into that we are a unit, and go from there? Now let's circle back to change yourself. Um, a lot of times I say that and people go, oh, you're judging me. You think there's something wrong with me. I don't know that person. Most of the time when people are sending me emails, I've never met you. I don't know anything about you. But what I do know is we all stagnate if we're not careful. Well, let me say it a little more forcefully. We all stagnate,
Yeah.
and we can decide there are ways that we can change that. And so it's not so much, is there something wrong, as much as is there a new place for us to expand into, that maybe there are new ways of thinking and understanding, and the growth mindset, is a great way of thinking about that. I had a couple. This has been a few years now, and this guy he was just like, this is who I am. You get what you get. And the wife kept trying to change how she was interacting. He was like, I'm just the way I am. And as hard as I would work, he was every week, what can I do? And then they had to cancel one week because he had to go to a sales conference. And so I set the trap. And so he came back and I said, hey, how'd the sales conference go? He said, oh, it was great. I learned so many new techniques on selling and all these new ways of interacting. And I said, oh, so you're better at selling than when you left? And he said, yes. And I said, and how did you get better at selling? And he said, because I was learning new things. And I said, so you can change.
That's a beautiful trap, Lee.
So that was our, there's always a pivot point when you're working with somebody, and they can pivot towards or away, but there's a pivot point that comes, and that was it for him, that he realized that he had stuck himself in this box. This is who I am, take it or leave it. And yet he didn't do that in other places, which is the truth of the growth mindset. We have it some places, not others. And the question is, can we bring it into places like our relationship? Is there a place for it to grow and to change? So connect with your spouse, change yourself, create a new path, are the three kind of arenas that I aim for when I'm working with people.
I love it. Okay, we're totally going to go down the whole change yourself, because as you were saying that, I thought of a couple of things. Like, first of all, I thought about and maybe my perspective on this is wrong, and so tell me what you think. But I would say generally, people think that change is bad.
So change is, I'm not sure if people see it as bad as much as there comes a point when you don't have to anymore, right? You've arrived. And so what I hear more often is, I don't like change. And what I have realized, my work with Thriving, I did a lot of work with what does it look like to change well? And when people say, I don't like change, what they really mean is, I don't like change pushed upon me. I like the changes I want to make. So it's not that change is the issue. It's how do you use that and understand that the change is it's the nature. I mean, we can't avoid it.
Right.
Every day I change. I get a little bit older. Every day, whatever is around us is changing us. So people, I think, are uncomfortable with change that they don't know how to manage. And they've somehow learned a lesson that when you hit adulthood, all done.
Yep.
Punch the clock. I'll just do it again tomorrow. And that's when we stagnate.
And, and the reason I was saying, I think some people see change as bad is because it's associated a lot of the time with fear, right? It's the change is unknown, change is uncomfortable, and to change, like for something to get better, we have to usually change, right? And I think that there's a lot of fear and hesitation around change. And I think that, to your point of like your example of your client, it comes like the change mindset. I absolutely agree that it's, I don't know, it's like it's safer in certain places because I can see how that's going to benefit me. Like if I do this thing, if I put in this effort and I make this change, I can see a pathway to benefit, which was your other thing, is pick a different path. But I mixed the two. I'm so sorry. But it's like, I can see how doing this hard work is going to result in a positive net, something for me. Whereas if I do this emotional change, I can't see how that's going to benefit me. I can't see that this will be worth it. And so it's like you having to create a correlation for that client to help them see that, like, it's a risk either way. Like you could learn this new strategy in sales and it could completely backfire or not make any progress whatsoever, but it's a new strategy you haven't tried. Why wouldn't you try it? If it's worked for someone else, you never know. What works for them may not work for you, but let's get creative. And that's what so much of marriage is, and parenting and all of the things. Like, get creative. If what you're doing isn't working, find a new way to do it. And you may have to do it differently than you're used to doing it, but When we're talking about change in marriage and change in behavior and the changing of the self, it comes with a lot of vulnerability, and you have to be really there. There has to be a safety. And so when you talk about your step one is connecting, right? So why would you can't encourage someone to change if that connection and that teamwork and that mutual support doesn't exist. And that's why we don't go in saying, okay, well, you're going to have to change. We're like, hold on. Yes, you're going to have to change. But before you do that, here's how that's going to be safe for you. So how do we teach people to let's go to that connection. It's such an important word. I think people resonate with, like, I want to connect with my spouse. But what does that mean? Break it down for us.
So connection, for me, just to kind of give us some frameworks to use, happens on three different levels. There is physical connection, there's emotional connection, and there's spiritual connection. And so then when we start thinking of it in those categories, the question is, where is connection not happening? Where is it getting caught? Sometimes it's none of the three, but a lot of times I see that couples are still connecting on one of those levels. So physical connection, any loving touch. Usually when I say that, they go, oh, okay, so you're talking about sex. Yes,
Mhm.
but also talking about hand holding, hugs, cuddling, anything that is loving connection or loving touch, because there are biochemical reactions that happen there that bond us when we are in loving touch with somebody. And it is also a matter of safety. We don't reach out and lovingly touch people that we think are going to hurt us or don't want to be around us. So that is a safety zone. That is, in my mind, the most primordial way of connection, because if you look around, I mean, my dog is a cuddle dog. Why? Because it makes her feel safe. And I think she also recognizes it makes us feel good too, right? There's a back and forth that does that. You put a bunch of puppies together and they just glom on each other.
Yeah.
Physical touch, connection. So that we share with, I'm not sure about cold-blooded creatures, but at least warm-blooded creatures are all about that.
Yep.
Emotional connection is when we feel like somebody gets us and we get them, that we also can share. So there's the verbal, but it's not just verbal. There's the nonverbal. As you and I are sitting here communicating, you're nodding in agreement with what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Hopefully, I'm doing the same when you're talking. So that is still emotional connection. We're sharing something in the discussion, even if it's nonverbal. So the verbal, nonverbal cues of I get you, you get me. We're on the same page, or at least
Mhm.
on the same chapter. Spiritual connection is so when I say that, people go, oh, you're talking about religion. Yes and no. I mean, yes, that would fall into that. But when you're talking about the deeper things, what dreams you have, what hopes you have, what fears you have, what are your core values? What is that layer that is lower, or more deeply within us that we often don't share with anyone else? Most couples, when they tell me about their I fell in love here, it includes we started talking and didn't stop for 3 hours, 6 hours, whatever. Talked all night. Well, they weren't just sharing stories; they were telling their story, and they're telling about their path. That spiritual connection, and then we forget to keep doing that. Some couples will tell me they're still physically connected, and sometimes they're even emotionally connected, but a lot of times the spiritual connection is no longer there. They're not talking about those deeper things. So when I'm talking with couples or with a person, because many times I'm just talking with one person who wants to
Mhm.
get things moving, I'm asking, where is the connection? Where is it not? And how can you begin to rebuild that? Because, so back to your fear, that's a big thing that I see blocking people. I'm afraid to reach out and hold their hand. Why? What if they don't hold my hand? You tried an experiment, right? I mean, and so one of the ways that I try to get people to get around that fear of change and fear of changing is to say, can we try experiments? We do it every day. Go to a restaurant. I'll try something new today. Don't like it? That's okay. I'll have dinner again tomorrow. So, it's
Mhm.
nothing lost here. And so we do it all the time. Try a new hobby, try new coffee at the shop, whatever. Those are little experiments. Can we use that as a model? And what often happens is that instead of it being an experiment, so I reach out and try to hold my spouse's hand, and my spouse pulls back. I could say, okay, well, never that again. And then I'm back into my fear place, or I can go, okay, that didn't work now. Maybe I said something earlier that I need to apologize for. Maybe my spouse is thinking about something else. Maybe they thought I was reaching for the remote and just moved their hand away. There are lots of possibilities here that I can't just say, no, they never want me to touch them again. And so part of the process is not allowing those hurt feelings from wherever in the past to continue to haunt us into the future, and not try new things, little experiments to see if we can move it forward.
Yeah, so well explained. I love the description of the spiritual intimacy because I honestly don't think I've ever put it in those terms or heard it in those terms. So I will have to credit you for that from now on when I explain it to people. Because I think so much of the time we do think of those deeper conversations as an emotional connection, but I love your distinction. I think that absolutely there is a distinction because I do work with couples that are like, oh, well, I can come home and talk about the hard day that I had. So, yeah, we can share emotion and kind of difficulty or the kids or whatever. But you're right. Like they don't create a space or allow themselves to have those deeper conversations about like deeper things they're thinking or feeling or worried about, maybe anxieties they're having about the job or whatever. It's more surface level emotion and not so much that really deep level stuff. And, one thing that I think you and I both agree on is that partnership, which we also would call the friendship within the marriage. And I don't want to, is that kind of, you relate to that a little bit too, right? Like
Yeah.
seeing the importance of friendship. Okay, you and I hadn't talked about that. I'm sorry. But I do like I am so big on that term. Like I always value one of the highest things that I value in my marriage is that I am married to my friend, and that he and I, the way we treat each other is not just because we love each other and we're married, but because we like each other. Like he's someone that I love hanging out with. And I've learned over the years that not everyone can recognize that that's something that's important, or maybe they didn't have that foundation. And so I always, I don't ever take that for granted. I'm always really thankful for that. But teaching couples that that is something you can nurture. You can build a friendship with your spouse. You don't have to start out with it. It would be great if you did, but if you don't, like, look, stuff happens, but you can nurture that. And so when we look at the connection, the teamwork, I throw friendship in there. So what is like in kind of I'll just throw it in your court, like how do you see, is it the same thing like talking about teamwork and friendship and connection, or do you think that there's differences within that?
There are some differences. So, I mean, friendship, by and large, that's a much larger grouping, right? And so I have friends. So another client came in one time and said, "You won't believe this, but I quit my job." I'm like, "Oh, super! What are you going to do now?" And we process that, right? And in some ways, that's what you would do with a friend. He
Hmm.
was a client, but it's the same thing. He'd come in and tell me he quit his job, and I'm like, "Oh, cool. Doesn't affect me." But he said, "Well, you reacted very differently than my spouse did," and I'm like, "Well, it doesn't affect me, right? I mean, your
Hmm.
spouse is now going, how are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to get the kids to college? I mean, there's a lot more there. So there is a friendship piece that, you can leave them at the door, that is deeper. But I do think that there are pieces of that we can carry over. I see a lot of couples who do one of two mistakes. One is they're like, nope, my spouse does their own thing. We happen to collide every now and then when we're at home. That's it. And then there are the ones who expect their spouse to meet every need. And so all their friendship has to be there. And both of those are fraught with problems. I would consider my wife to be my best friend. And what do best friends do? Well, we go and play pickleball together. We take walks together. We go travel together. We go to dinner and just chat. We can sit quietly on the couch and watch something on TV. That's what you do with friends. But there's a whole nother layer that I recognize that friends can not worry so much about the actions of another person because it doesn't impact them as directly. That changes when you're going, oh, we're on a team. So I'm always cautious. and especially since you haven't had a bunch of men on to use sports analogies, and I'm going to go with a sports
Go
analogy
for
anyway.
it.
But if you're on a team together, the goal is to win. And the goal is not to prove you're the better player. The goal is not to hog the ball. The goal is to win the game. Every now and then, you may need to take the shot. You may need to carry the ball. You may, if my spouse is not feeling as well, I may need to play harder, right? Brene Brown talks about the concept of 100%. And I love that idea that when she comes in the door, she's like, "Hey, I've got 10% today," and her husband may say, "No problem. I've got 90%. We're good." And they can still cover it. But if he comes in and goes, "Yeah, I've got about 30%, they go, "Time to hunker down. This is not the time to, be pushing on things. This is time for us to pull down." And the same with for that team idea, I'm going to play it safe now. What can we do since we're at a different level? And then you also ask the question, what are you better at, right? So my wife and I do play a good bit of pickleball, and I'm better. I mean, you can't tell here, but I'm 6'4". I have a pretty
Wow.
wide span. She's 5'3". So who's
Wow.
going to catch a long shot or a high shot? That's going to be me because I do it better. She's really
Mhm.
better at serving. And so, first serve, you do it. And we play off our strengths. And I think that's important. Let's take it out of the sports analogy to say, what are our strengths? How do we tackle what we need to as a team to get through life, to take care of the kids, to take care of the house, to take care of the resources coming into the house? All of those are fair questions, but it's very different if you ask it as, how do we play together to win?
Mhm. And this is why I was so excited to talk to you, because I feel like you and I are so aligned in the way that we see marriage. I preach, okay, that's not a good word. I heavily annoy people about like the idea of like being a team, being connected. I use a basketball, and I'm not like a huge sports person. I mean, I am, but my knowledge is average. But I can see it in the sense of like maybe a team on a basketball court, and like I think of the strengths. I use that a lot. And so you and I are just, I got you, Lee. This is great. We're just going to hang out a lot. I think we're going to have to do many more episodes. But no, I love it. I love your whole perception of being able to recognize that you're not competing, you're working together. And when you work together and you are on a team and your goal is to win, then you do encourage the other when they do better than you. And that you know that they're not going to rub it in your face. They're not trying to up their game at the expense of you, and you're not trying to do the same. Like you're both trying your hardest because the goal is to nurture the marriage and really grow and achieve all the things. Like if you succeed, then your wife succeeds, and vice versa. But if you try to just further your own agenda, then it hurts her, and vice versa. So the idea, and I think this is where we do a lot of psychoeducation, is teaching couples that there does have to be a lot of what's the word? Like I have to, it's not a like giving in by any means, it's a sharing. Like let me put my own kind of priorities, like let me make you my priority, knowing that you're going to make me your priority. And it's okay if I don't win. It's okay that you win because it benefits both of us. And I think that that's really hard for some couples that are coming into us maybe with some of their own trauma history, because and that's a whole other topic, right? But like it's hard for a person like that to look at their spouse and say, okay, I trust you, because maybe they don't have a history of being able to trust a friend, a family member, or just a person in their life. And so a lot of the times couples get married without recognizing that their traumas or their own insecurities have not really fully been addressed. And so when it comes to merging your life with this other person and trying to be a team, can be really hard to not take certain things personally. The other person's success now feels like my loss, or somehow that I'm insignificant, or just not good enough, whatever. And so I just kind of took us down a whole different thing. We don't have to go there, but I think I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't want anyone listening. Like you and I try to normalize that marriage struggles are normal. It's okay. It's okay that you need to get support and redirect and pivot to, a place where you are trying to get on the same page if you're not already on there. And back to my whole fear of change, whether we like it or not, we change. It's
Yeah.
not possible to stay stagnant. And so I think one of the things is this fear that if I change or if my spouse changes, then somehow we're going to grow apart. And that can happen. But the goal in staying emotionally and spiritually and physically connected and nurturing it every single day that we are in a relationship keeps us going in the same direction. It doesn't mean that we're always doing the exact same thing, but we are doing it parallel, like kind of walking it together.
Yeah. I think there is that growing apart thing to me happens when you've disconnected, not when you've changed. When you're
Good
disconnected.
point.
So chaos theory in physics says that, if you start with, you can be at the same equation, but if you just start the equation a little bit differently and you don't track it together, they can divert paths, even if they look like they're the same thing. And so for couples who don't continue checking in, don't continue making sure that they understand, they don't have to match. It's not like we have to see things just alike. It's not that we have to do all the same things. So there are the couples that are so disconnected that we have this, and then we have the enmesh couples that are, we have to order the same food, we have to wear the same clothes, and that can be enmeshment, which ironically enough can have the exact same disconnection to it. We
Yeah.
stay so connected to look like we're on the same page that we've lost our individuality, we've lost our capacity. It's like back to the team analogy, we both have to dribble at the same time and shoot at the same time, rather than going, you might be better at the hook shot and I might be better at
Mhm.
a short shot. There are lots of options. And so when we bring our best self and stay in that connection, then we have a better chance of winning. We're not going to be at our best every day. So it's our best
Mhm.
at that moment that we bring into the process. And if we can work at that, we can get there. So to track back a little bit, a lot of times I hear couples say, if there's struggle, there's something wrong. And I think that misses the point of what struggle is about. As far as I can tell, the only time we grow, we change is when there is some struggle, some challenge. If you want to gain muscle, you have to lift something heavier than you've been lifting to do it. If you want to get better at something, you have to go to the next level of whatever that is. And those are challenges. And so the challenges give us the opportunities of exploring more. Conflict is the nature of having two people who have to share their life and make it through life together. There's going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreements. The question is whether we say that conflict needs to serve our relationship. Can the conflict better our relationship? Can we
Mhm.
see that as, oh, we disagree on this, so what can we take together to get to where we want to get to? That's a different mindset than we're oppositional and there's got to be a winner and a loser.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting as you were saying that, like an example that popped in my mind was of like work. So what I was thinking of is when you were saying life, that struggle just happens. Life, I mean, every day life throws things at us, whether you're running or someone cuts you off or your kid doesn't want to listen to you. Like there's constant struggle all day, every day. And we just navigate and we just keep going. But when it comes to marriage, I feel like there's sometimes we give ourselves permission to not view it as a part of life. We're like, oh, well, like if there's struggle there, I'm not going to work on it. I'm just going to dismiss it, put it in the corner. I'll get to it later. And so back to when I said it reminds me of work is if you have a job and you have a deadline, there's something you're supposed to work on, and then something crashes, like the computer isn't working right, the system isn't working right, someone didn't get something to you that you need to be able to finish this thing. Well, you don't just say, well, I guess I'm done, I'm just going to not meet my deadline. Like, no, you move heaven and earth because it is a deadline. You have to do it. You have, like, there are people counting on you. You got to knock it out. So you will go out of your way. You might change the routine. You may contact someone new and reach out to support and do something difficult. And it will be a hard day. But at the end of the day, it's done. You've learned new strategies. You learned to troubleshoot something that you didn't know how to troubleshoot before. And because you've experienced that today, now you will always know, well, now I know how to do that thing, right? And so taking us back to marriage, it's okay. It's supposed to be hard. Like, well, no, that's not true. It's not supposed to be hard. That's not fair. It's normal to experience struggle.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like with parenting, when your kid is running 103 fever and you're scared out of your mind, now you have to deal with this thing. You have to take your kid to the doctor, learn all these things, do some treatments, and now you know how to handle a sick kid. So the next time your kid's sick, you don't maybe experience the same amount of anxiety. Still anxiety, but you just go into troubleshooting mode. Same with your marriage. If your spouse and you have a conflict or a disagreement, and the first time it scares the crap out of you because you're worried that, like, oh my God, maybe we shouldn't have gotten married, or what if we can't overcome this? But you do the work, you calm down, you talk, and you learn to listen, and you do all the things necessary to overcome and troubleshoot. So the next time this problem comes up or something similar, you pull from that, Rolodex, to pull an old word, of memories of coping skills, of solutions, and you apply it. And then the
Mhm.
next time it happens, you do the same. And then it just is easier to cycle through those. So I just talked for a really long time. I'm so
Well,
sorry.
so one of the things that occurred to me is I was talking with a person one time, and so I said, why don't you try this and this and this? And they came back, and I said, how'd it go? And they said, well, I didn't do those things. And I said, why not? And they said, well, I was scared. And I said, okay, but why didn't you do it? And they said, well, because I was scared. And I said, no, that was an emotion. You had an emotion of being fearful. Why didn't you do it? And we kept going around and around in this because we've made fear something that we avoid feeling, right? And so I said, let me make a recommendation that you go pro. And he said, what do you mean? I said, if you go pro, like you think of that in the, if I'm pro at something, like if this is my job, it doesn't matter if I'm scared to do that report. Somebody says you got to do the report. It doesn't matter. It's my job. If I'm an amateur, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to shuffle it off. But if I'm a pro, I go pro, then it doesn't matter if I'm uncomfortable about something. I'm going to do it because that's
Yep.
part of the deal. What you don't want is to be in the midst of surgery with your pro doctor and they go, I'm not going to do this because I'm a little scared of this. You need them to go, okay, we're going to figure this out. Let's get through this. And that's being pro. And many times when I watch people, they are not going pro. They're playing the amateur thing where I can do it if I want to, not if I want to. And along the way, they just continue that disconnection.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's taking something that you're responsible for and making it optional. It's not optional. You signed up for this and you need to work your hardest. And I'm very much like that when it comes to parenting. Listen, I will be honest, I have a lot of opinions. I'm an opinionated person, but when it comes to like giving your hardest, when it comes to whether you're parenting or working on your marriage or working on whatever, it's okay to struggle. It's okay to be tired and it's okay to not want to do it. Like, I can't fault you if you don't feel like doing it. But at the end of the day, it's what you're responsible for. Go do it. Like, you push through and you will come out on the other side. Maybe you need to ask for help. Maybe you need to learn a new technique. Maybe you need to do some research, read an article, read a book, listen to a YouTube channel, find Lee's podcast and listen to him talk about it. But like, there is always a new method and there are always new things we can learn and that will lead to change, but change in a positive way. And even hard change, again, like sometimes you hit rock bottom and you're like, wow, I made such an awful decision and it failed. Okay, I bet you learned a crap ton about it though. Like, it really now has prepared you to make better decisions moving
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, yeah. And what's behind all of that, and this is what I always talk about, the North Star of your relationship. And I've stood in front of groups and said, what's the North Star of your relationship? First one they always give, love. Okay, you're not going to feel love every day. You're not, and it's going to shift around. It's going to be a different place in the sky. And then they'll say, happiness. I'm here for the happiness. Okay, is that the commitment you made when you gave your vows? As long as we're happy, we'll do this. Happiness comes and goes. It just does. So they'll name a few, and I'll finally go, actually, the North Star is always commitment. I
Mm.
committed to this. So I made vows, and my vows, at least the ones I made, didn't leave a lot of loose days out there that are optional. Good or bad days, sick or healthy days, rich or poor days. There's not a lot left. You just covered the days, and so there's this commitment you've made, and it guides you through when there's a storm. If you're on a boat and there's a storm, the storm finally passes and you look up and go, okay, there's the North Star. I can now re-navigate. Same thing with parenting. When you have a kid, I remember holding my child going, I'm committed to this child, to get this child to adulthood. And they're going to make choices along the way that I can't help, but my commitment is to do my best to get them there. And there are not many other relationships that have that level of commitment. If I have a friend and I finally go, you know what, this is toxic, it's easy for me to go, see you. But in a marriage, I have made a commitment as long as I'm willing to keep. At some point, there are lots of marriages that have become so toxic. Yeah, they're not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
But how many miss the boat because before they really work at it, go, yeah, I'm just not feeling it anymore. And
Yeah.
that's where the commitment comes back in, because not feeling it anymore, feelings are not how we make decisions.
Yep.
We say, okay, what was the reason for this? Can I reorient to this? And the commitment is always the piece that helps us reorient.
I love that. It is. It's the, have you given 100%? Have you done everything that you can? And if there's ever a no, all right, what else can you try? So I'm mindful of our time. I could talk to you all day long, but I have a client in a little bit, so I got to wrap us up.
Yes, we do.
So tell me, I want to make sure that we share with the listeners a little bit about how to find you, where to find your books, and your podcast, all the things that you do. Tell us about that real quick.
Yeah, so shortcuts to that. If you want to find my books, go to savethemarriage.com. That's my primary website, savethemarriage.com/books. If you want to do the podcast, savethemarriagepodcast.com. Save the Marriage System is at savethemarriage.com. And if you're interested, you do Substack. Just started a recent Substack. It's theconnectioncompass.online. Theconnectioncompass.online. So you can sign up for free for that. Find some stuff.
And
there
I'll
too.
link to all the stuff in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
So tell us real quick, what if a couple is ready to do the work and they want to work with you, what does working with you look like? You have a course or a one-to-one option. Couples can work with you directly, right?
They can. I generally, because my coaching fees are not low. So I always recommend they start with my system. First of all, they get some
Yeah.
information there. I don't have to catch them up on that. That's a costly thing if I'm having to teach them. So they start there and they may go, this guy is full of baloney and I don't want anything to do with him. And that saves them from having to take the next step. So I always recommend people start at least with my program, the savethemarriage.com. So that's a good place
Love
to
it.
start. But yeah, I have other options for coaching.
Perfect. I love that. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'll link to all of it. So, I think that you and I just gonna bug you. I'm gonna email you soon and be like, hey, let's do another one.
Let's do it.
So yeah, we'll just think of topics to do. Thank you so much for coming on and doing
Thank
this
you.
episode with me. I've really enjoyed it. And
It was
then
fun.
I will talk to you next time.
Take care.
All right, bye.